Okay, so we're going to be studying Christian ritual over the next two lessons. The first lesson, there are two major rituals that Jesus explicitly instructed his disciples to perform, baptism and the Lord's Supper. And so today we're going to be exploring baptism. Now, first of all, the word baptism is an anglicized version of the Greek word baptismos. Considering that all New Testament scenes of baptism took place at lakes and rivers, can you guess what that Greek word means? The etymology of the word brings us back to this root Greek word, which means to immerse, as in to immerse in water. That's what the word baptism literally means when translated into the Greek. So, baptism is a ritual that marks an important stage in someone's life. That is a rite of passage. Baptism is a rite of passage. Circumcision is a rite of passage. We saw that young boy getting his head shaved in Buddhism to join the Sangha. That is a rite of passage. A ritual that marks an important stage in someone's life. Marriage is a rite of passage. So there are two types of, well, many different types of baptism, but in terms of the method of how it is actually done, there are two types of, the manner of baptism. Infant baptism and believer's baptism. Infant baptism is the practice of baptizing infants or young children, and believers, occasionally called paedobaptism. Believer's baptism is the practice of baptizing a person on the basis of his or her profession of faith in Jesus Christ, occasionally called credobaptism. So, it's important for you to understand why is it that infant baptism could not really be a believer's baptism. Also, we need to keep in mind that in the early baptism churches, they did not have a baptismal pool. Baptisms took place in the open air in rivers, streams, and at any time of the year. Why would that be more possible in the Middle East than it would be, for example, in Alaska? Middle East being, of course, the birthplace of Christianity. Okay. Now, manner of baptism. Immersion baptism is the practice of baptizing by completely submersing the person, or mostly submersing the inductee, under the surface of a body of water. Effusion baptism is the practice of baptizing by pouring water over the head of the inductee. So now we're going to look at some examples in the Catholic Church of adult baptism. Write down your observations.
I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy
Spirit. Okay. And Catholic child baptism, although this you just need to observe. It's very similar to the adult baptism. You don't need to write any notes on this one.
And of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
And then we have the Catholic infant baptism. Now, this method of baptism, where water is poured on the head of a person being baptized, is called effusion. That's the specific definition, effusion. Method of baptism where water is poured on the head of a person being baptized. Now, this is a question you need to answer in your notes. Why do you think that Catholics, and not just Catholics, some other Protestants as well, why do you think Catholics use effusion rather than immersion when baptizing infants? Use your logic. Okay, now we're going to look at an Orthodox adult baptism. Write your observations.
In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Child in the Orthodoxy, child baptisms are also meaning a child old enough to know how to hold their breath, etc., are done in the same way as the adult Orthodox with immersion. Now we're going to take a look at an Orthodox infant baptism. Write your observations in your notes. Again, I think this is in Georgia, so he's speaking in Georgian, but he's saying in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And you can see in Orthodoxy, immersion baptism is important even for infants, and that probably goes back to the fact that, of course, Greek Orthodoxy understood Greek during the centuries that Catholic Christianity, meaning European, before Protestantism even existed, Western Europeans were basing their faith in the Latin translation, and the Latin translation doesn't give the obvious translation of the word baptize as immersion. So that's probably the best explanation for why Orthodoxy does immersion baptism even with infants. It's their understanding that the literal translation of baptize was to immerse, and holding to that word immerse in their practice. Okay, then we get to Protestant adult baptism. Those of you who took AP Euro understand that Protestant, and maybe the other World Studies program also talks about the Protestant sect coming out of the Catholic sect of Christianity. There being disagreements over a number of things, including the authority of Rome and what exactly causes someone to be saved, whether it's by faith or works or both. And so then we have this new sect, major sect, come out of the Catholic Church called Protestantism. And so here we have, with adult baptism, it depends on the denomination whether or not it's going to be immersion or effusion. Now, of course, we need to explain what denomination means, so you need to find a place to write this definition down. Denomination is a recognized, autonomous, meaning independent branch of the Christian Church, and usually we're referring to Protestant Christian Church. There's a lot of variety of baptism styles within Protestantism. Even within a single denomination. For example, Lutheran churches use effusion for both adults and infants. But some Lutheran churches use immersion for both adults and infants. So it just depends. There's a lot of variety in Protestantism. Okay, and then infant baptism, again, it depends on the denomination. Most mainline Protestant denominations perform infant baptism. But then we need to understand what mainline Protestant means. Mainline Protestant denominations are defined as Protestant denominations in the United States that contrast in history and practice with evangelical churches. And we'll get to what evangelical means in a second. But you need to write this definition of mainline Protestant down. It's the Protestant denominations in the U.S. that contrast in history and practice with evangelical churches. And some examples of mainline Protestant are Lutheran, Episcopalian or Anglican, and Methodist. Those are some examples of mainline Protestant. These things will be on the test. You will need to be able to determine the difference in practice between these with this ritual. That's mainline Protestant. Now, evangelical Protestantism, again, this definition needs to be written somewhere. Christians who share, this is the best definition we can come up with for evangelical because there's so many different definitions for it, but this tends to be the most accepted definition. Christians who share four main qualities: a high regard for the Bible, a focus on Jesus' crucifixion and its saving effects, a belief that humans need to be converted to Christianity, and the belief that faith should influence one's public life. And this one right here, the belief that humans need to be converted, that's where we get this evangelical, because evangelion means to spread the good news, I believe, and that connects to this idea that they need to share their belief and encourage other people to share their belief. Some example denominations are Baptists and all the denominations that come out of the Baptist movement, such as Assemblies of God, Church of, let's see here, Calvary, the Calvary churches, Church of Christ, I believe, as well as all the non-denominational churches. You can, if you take a look at the doctrines of most Protestants that call themselves non-denominational, you can connect the dots to Baptist doctrine and Baptist practice. So these tend to fall into the category of evangelical. So back to baptism. The Baptist denominations of Protestantism and most of evangelical denominations as well, they got their name, the Baptists got their name from their belief that baptism should only be performed as a symbol of one's own decision about Jesus. And therefore, Baptist denominations don't perform paedo-baptism or infant baptism. And as a result, most evangelical churches that descend from the Baptist movement also do not perform infant baptism. They only do believers' baptism. So again, non-denominational churches generally, and, you know, Pentecostal churches, all those that descend from the Baptist movement will only perform believers' baptism. Someone who's old enough to make a decision about Jesus can be baptized. Now you're going to be working on this assignment where you're reading New Testament sacred texts on baptism, but before you do, I want to make sure that you understand when you read the word household, you can draw your own conclusions, but please be aware of what it's being translated from. The Greek word oikos, translated as house or household, has traditionally included infants and children in its meaning. There's no evidence of this word being used either in secular Greek, biblical Greek, or in the writing of Hellenistic Judaism in a way which would restrict its meaning to only adults. So keep that in mind when you're reading passages that mention a household. This will help you make an educated decision of how you interpret those texts. Finally, you're also going to be working in the worksheets on the sacramental view versus the symbolic view of baptism, and I want to make sure you understand what that means. Sacramental view of baptism is Christian groups that believe that baptism is an actual mystical event, that God uses baptism to transmit saving grace. So at that moment of baptism, with the sacramental view of baptism, it is believed that at that moment God sets that person free from the power of sin and is given a new spiritual life. So baptism is a mystical event. And that person is spiritually reborn during that event. This is the sacramental view of baptism. Whereas the symbolical view of baptism is that baptism is a symbol. Baptism is a public symbol of a spiritual rebirth that has already occurred. the person being baptized has already professed belief in Jesus, and that belief is what has saved that person. Baptism does not save that person. The actual belief does. And one last thing, you have this chart given to you, but there's one thing missing from your chart, and that is that mainline Protestants use effusion or immersion, and mainline Protestants do perform infant baptism.